Hello, and welcome everybody to this key session of Finance in Common 2021. This is the Leaders' Dialogue. We're very, very pleased to have come to this point in the sessions. We gathered high representatives of national governments, of international organizations, of financial institutions, as well as multilateral development banks, to highlight the contribution to the FiCS Coalition to the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals. And also in view, of course, of the forthcoming G20, which will be here in Rome, and of COP26 summits. So, without further delay, I'd like to call to the floor the chairman of Finance in Common, Rémy Rioux. Thank you.
Excellencies, dear colleagues, thank you for taking the time to collectively reflect on our shared engagement for sustainable finance. We need a leaders' dialogue to foster the Finance in Common initiative. Last year, this dialogue was the occasion for all of us to receive a political blessing and guidance from UN Secretary General, President Macky Sall of Senegal, President Alvarado of Costa Rica, President Fernandez of Argentina, President Macron of France, President of COP26 Alok Sharma, and others. This year, our dialogue mostly turns to multilateral voices, for them to consider our movement, to take care of it, and help us make it grow even bigger to support international and national priorities. We will be today with Antonio Guterres, again, so present from the start of FiCS, with our so dear friend Kristalina Georgieva, the IMF Managing Director, so pleased to have her guiding us. We will also hear Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the Director General of the World Trade Organization, Matthias Cormann of OECD, and of course, prominent heads of multilateral development banks. Our dear colleagues, President Hoyer is with us today, so glad you could make it in person. President Adesina from Abidjan, Governor Monticelli also in the room with us, Odile Renaud-Basso, Mohamed Al-Jasser, Marcos Trojo, my twin Maktar Diop, AfDB, CAF, World Bank, all of you. Before listening to you and your messages, I'd like to start by informing the group, the colleagues, of the key takeaways of this summit so far. We've been working very hard over the 12 past months, and during this 2 days summit, wonderfully hosted by Cassa Depositi e Prestiti. It is a vibrant summit to unlock the potential of all PDBs, over 20 sessions, about 20 high-level speakers, including many academics and think tanks representatives, 5 research papers, providing the discussion with concrete materials to help make our actions consistent with the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. A strong presence of CEOs reflecting the diversity of our community, new members. We heard the Bern Union on trade finance and export credit this morning joining FiCS. A vibrant year also, during which we succeeded in measuring more precisely the magnitude of the FiCS movement. A new database has been released, 530 public development banks, 150 countries having their own national public development bank, the other 45 covered by regional instruments. A $20 trillion aggregated balance sheet, 2.5 trillion last year invested in so many sectors, and a significant increase of our combined financing, probably about 15% more in 2020, at the heart of the crisis compared to 2019. And this hard-working year has materialized into 14 coalitions, gathering various public development banks and their stakeholders to advance social investment in times of COVID, water and sanitation, or a specific focus this year on agriculture in relation with climate and nature. So I close by saying that I really hope that FiCS is becoming progressively a global architecture, a global platform, a global discussion, a global public good to support the UN and now the G20 as part of the ongoing global discussion on the financial architecture. Good news is that all public development banks share a deep consensus on our role and our values. Very good news, we want to collectively operationalize more ambitiously the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. So we propose all our shareholders, the governments, all our stakeholders, the private sector, the civil society, municipalities, others, to leverage our $20 trillion balance sheet and expertise even more ambitiously. I stop here and I thank you all for your engagement.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And so now we start with our messages. We're very happy to have so many with us. The beginning will be from the heads of the Multilateral Development Banks, as was said. And so our first one will be Kristalina Georgieva, the Managing Director of the IMF. Thank you. Should be.
Yeah. Thank you very much for including me in today's discussion. Fantastic to be with colleagues and friends. Very grateful to Rémy, Rioux, to his AfDB colleagues and the Cassa Depositi e Prestiti for the invitation, but in particular for the incredibly strong agenda and involvement of so many leaders in the dialogue. We have a team financed in common, 3 words that resonate perfectly with the conclusions of the IMF World Bank annual meetings that we just had. While the global recovery continues, it is unequal and incomplete. New challenges continue to emerge, and we see downside risks intensifying. Limited policy space, including rising public debt, adds to these difficulties in so many countries. And what is so clear is that policymakers face particularly difficult choices, possibly the most difficult in decades. Why? Because they have to end the pandemic, provide near-term support to the economy, and simultaneously take transformative actions to build green, inclusive, smart, resilient growth path for the future. Daunting challenges, particularly so in many emerging markets and developing countries. So clearly what we need is all hands on deck to manage the recovery and the transformation, each partner bringing its particular strengths and expertise. And that takes me to the public development banks we had the opportunity to engage with today. Given your regional, national, or subnational knowledge and your considerable financial firepower, you have a very important role to play in the constellation of institutions financing development. You're already doing very valuable work. And in the face of the daunting challenges in front of us, of course you have the potential to do better, realizing it exactly for why we are in this space, exactly why you have the coalition of public development banks. I truly and wholeheartedly applaud your efforts. Over the years, we have seen public development banks finance many socially viable but financially less attractive or high-risk activities. Just to mention one example, lending to young, small, and innovative firms. During the pandemic, many public development banks have also effectively helped governments support economic activities in a way that really made a difference. They stepped up to provide much needed credit to the economy in many emerging markets, from Brazil to Turkey, across the world, but also in advanced economies, in Italy, in France, in Japan. They have also increased financing for climate and sustainable development related projects within national borders and beyond. This finance for the commons is becoming a driving force for collaboration among the public development banks and, as this session highlights, much needed collaboration between public development banks and the international financial institutions. So let me see a few words how we at the IMF see our engagement with public development banks. First, in our regular country assessments, we can build on best practice in the universe of public development banks to support sound development in countries where they're still new, highlighting the importance of having in place the preconditions for success. Based on areas in which the fund is active, allow me to highlight a few. The success of public development banks critically depends upon a clear policy mandate, sound funding or sound business model, and a high degree of governance and transparency. As public development banks tend to take more risk, they need to assess and disclose costs and risks properly, adhere to prudential regulations and sound risk management practices, and adopt best practices in corporate governance. And there, our staff at the fund, of course, is a good resource for you. Second, a key ingredient to the success of public development banks is aligning their actions with the country's development priorities. This requires their integration into the overall fiscal policy planning and execution, and the approval of government financing support to public banks through the budget process. And again, this is bread and butter for the fund, and we are very supportive of this integration. Last but not least, we do need to advance cooperation towards the Sustainable Development Goals, towards the Paris Agreement, step up in areas that are essential for our future, like climate action or preventing a digital divide. We have provided from the fund an unprecedented amount of emergency support, accompanied by policy advice and capacity development to deal with the impact of this crisis, but also to move towards that green and resilient, inclusive future I spoke about. We have recently allocated $650 billion equivalent of special drawing rights, largest in our history, to directly support our members' reserve positions and provide resources to fight the pandemic. And what we are doing now, we are very excited about that. We are developing options to voluntarily channel SDRs from countries in strong position to low income and also vulnerable middle income countries. We got the green light from our annual meetings to work on a new resilience and sustainability trust to support the transformational needs of our more vulnerable members, working closely with the World Bank on this instrument, and I very much hope over time working closely with you. So synergies of our institutions would make us all deliver more and deliver better. Congratulations to the coalition for striving to boost the impact of the public development banks. We are very thrilled and honored to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And now we're very honored to have in presence with us Werner, the president of the European Investment Bank. Thank you. Sorry.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, cher Rémy, dear colleagues, it's a real pleasure to be in Rome with you today. I thank Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, and all the members of the Finance in Common Coalition for making this possible. And I'm very happy to see so many of our colleagues remotely connected, but I can only tell you, you're making a big mistake. You should be here under these circumstances, enjoying Italian hospitality. It's at its best. So thank you very much for the Italian colleagues as well. This really is a crucial time. Our challenge today is a test of multilateralism. Our response must be a testament to our strength of our multilateral ties. With only a few days ahead of COP22 in Glasgow, this is high time to act and to make the best of the financial resources available through public development banks and crowd in the private sector. And we should be very cooperative with our friends in the United Kingdom who aim at ambitious results of COP26 under the leadership of our friend Al-Jasser in order to provide a substantial contribution of the public development banks to the success of COP26. I am convinced that public development banks can achieve a lot more collectively on a number of fronts, in particular on the transition towards net zero. The path to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, the emergence of breakthrough technologies and their deployment at scale, because we all know that we will never achieve the SDGs nor the Paris goals with existing technologies. We need to invest much more into innovation in order to get where we want to be. As a global bank, the European Investment Bank provides tailored support to different regions worldwide. The EU Bank's development work represents an investment bridge between EU policies and projects on the ground and responds to the growing demand for strategic cooperation between the world and Europe. This is why the EU Bank is proud to be part of the European Union's Team Europe approach, and we stand ready to extend the outreach of our partnership. It is important for us to listen to leaders and work with players that are ambitious and committed innovators. This is key for mapping shared investment priorities. And Finance in Common can be a catalyst for building on each other's strengths and increase global impact. At the EU Bank, we stand ready to cooperate not just at policy level, but also through our nuts and bolts, our experts and bankers that work on hands-on initiatives and projects. I'm happy to share with you that from January 2022, at the EU Bank, we will reorganize our activities into a dedicated organizational structure for development. This will improve the way we deliver our development finance in close cooperation with our colleagues from the European Commission and the European External Action Service. We will strengthen our local presence, in particular in Africa, placing more bankers and engineers at the disposal of Team Europe on the ground with the aim to increase impact. We are not daunted by the challenges. In fact, we are inspired by our mission to put the European Union's climate action and development goals into cooperation on the ground, and by our role in supporting the fulfillment of the ambitious aspiration of our partners. I look forward to working very closely with you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next message will be an online message. Okay, all right. The online message isn't immediately available, so we will move immediately to someone else who thankfully is in presence here, Carlo Monticelli. He is appointed governor of the Council of European Development Banks, and we're very happy to have him with us. Thank you.
Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, cher Rémy, Being part of Finance in Common, of this shared effort to harness finance to address the key challenges of our time, is exciting and demanding. Exciting because there is nothing more deeply involving than to be part of a group of people who is animated by the shared passion to pursue a common objective which is worth it. And is there anything more valuable than to make sure that our societies leave no one behind in any aspect of human life which makes it worth living? Inclusive growth, shared prosperity, women empowerment, climate action, sustainable development, all these are the dimensions in which the overarching objective of leaving no one behind can be articulated. It has already been done so, and I don't need to do it further to preach to the converted. But being part of Finance in Common is also demanding. It requires to ask oneself what one's institution can contribute to the common effort. Well, what I believe the Council of Europe Development Bank, the SEB, can bring to the table is its unique expertise on social investment. And in this moment where inequalities are on the rise and the risk of really leaving somebody behind is getting bigger and bigger, this expertise is particularly relevant. The SEB has only been supporting and financing social investment in its 65 years of life. Yes, 65. Acquiring specific skills, because it is the only development bank which has social investment as its sole mandate. Now, I could elaborate this in detail, explaining what these skills means in practice, but not now. Now, the point is another one, is to say that the SEB is here, is happy to be here, and it has a specific contribution to offer to the joint effort of Finance in Common. Finance in Common is a terrific platform to unite all the public development banks, to better coordinate their activities, to leverage their individual action, to make sure that the whole is larger than the sum of its parts. It must continue to work and to flourish. The SEB will be there and will spare no effort to make sure that this is the case. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your words. So now we move on to some of our online guests, which we're very happy to have with us as well. I'll begin with Odile Renaud-Basso, President of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the EBRD. Thank you. You are connected.
Excellencies, dear friends, dear Rémy, it's really a pleasure for me to be here. Unfortunately, I'm not in Rome, and Werner explained us what we were missing, and I'm sure about that. But it's still a very pleasure to be with you today and to see what has been done in the last year. Finance in Common, now called FiCS, so which is a good, when you have an acronym, it means that you are part of the international world, because we are living with acronyms and so forth. So, but now to see that Finance in Common has done so much, with a clear recognition in the G20 finance communique, which I think is also an acknowledgement of the value of the working together. I think you can be very proud, we can be very proud collectively. And I think this reflects the strengths we individually and collectively have. And I must say that I'm deeply convinced that this strength is needed more than ever. When we look what is ahead of us, moving towards the COP26 in only 2 weeks, and the magnitude of the efforts and of the challenge we are facing with climate commitments which are quite far behind what would be needed if we want to reach the Paris Agreement objective, I think that our collective and individual strengths is needed to support the radical transformation of the economies of our system and to really strengthen climate action from all stakeholders. I think we really need comprehensive action, putting at the heart of this transformation the power of market to shift investment into low carbon sectors. And in this respect, I really believe that moving towards carbon price is absolutely needed in order to compensate for a major market failure, which has led us to a difficult point. We need also collaborative action, and that's why finance in common is so important. I think public development institutions and their partners have a special role to play in this transition. We can support the framework for efficient markets to facilitate green investment. We also create market by providing finance for early movers when markets are not mature enough and when there is no private capital to come in. And we are also providing financing when there are policy barriers which prevent investment from being realized. So that's why I believe we are deeply committed to doing the EBRD. This is at the core of our strategy, with a commitment to have 50% of our investment in the green area, with a commitment to be fully Paris aligned by the end of 2022. And this will be really at the core of our activity moving forward. I believe, as I was saying, that we will be successful only if we work together. And I really believe that public development banks have a unique role to play and have an enormous responsibility in supporting our countries, our clients at all levels, local level, national level, private sector, to do what is needed to reach the objective of Paris alignment and ensure a sustainable future. So I'm very happy to see the work that has been done. We still have a lot of work ahead, and I'm sure that working together, we will make a huge contribution to the objective we all share. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you once again. Our next speaker is Mohamed Al-Jasser, President of the Islamic Development Bank. And thank you. You have the floor, if you are with us.
Yes, I am.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. It is indeed a great honor and pleasure for me to be with you today at the second edition of the Finance in Common Summit. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused mass casualties and widespread socioeconomic disruptions across the world. The Islamic Development Bank's response to its 57 member countries has been swift and effective. Along with other partners, we have committed over $4.5 billion under our Strategic Preparedness and Response Program. This program supports emergency health response, food security, and economic recovery. It is expected to benefit large number of the population of these countries. The program also comprises 850 million ISDB COVID-19 vaccine financing facility, or IVAC, which aims to support member countries in vaccine development, manufacturing, procurement, and delivery. In essence, we are practicing financial countercyclicality, as one should in these tough times. Despite its devastating impact, the COVID-19 pandemic offers an unprecedented opportunity to rethink and forge a more equitable and resilient path towards sustainable development goals. With SDGs at its heart, the bank is committed to supporting its member countries on the path towards sustainable recovery. Our target is that by 2025, at least 35% of the Islamic Development Bank operations will be in climate finance. To this end, we are increasing investments in renewable energy, climate-resilient agriculture, urban water and transport systems. We therefore contribute directly to the Paris Agreement objectives and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Ladies and gentlemen, as a leader of Islamic finance for economic development, the Islamic Development Bank is committed to the sustainable investment of its resources through ethical and responsible financing. In this connection, the bank developed a comprehensive sustainable finance framework aligned with the international standards for green, social, and sustainable financing. Developing the framework strengthened our organization's environmental, social, and governance practices, or ESG. Under this framework, the bank has successfully issued 3 landmark Islamic bonds, commonly known as Sukuk. The issuances are the debut Green Sukuk, which raised 1 billion euros in 2019, the debut Sustainability Sukuk, which mobilized $1.5 billion exclusively for COVID-19 financing in June 2020, and second Sustainability Sukuk, which was also our largest issuance ever, raising $2.5 billion in March 2021. The proceeds of these issuances helped the bank finance renewable energy, clean transportation, energy efficiency, climate-smart agriculture and agroforestry, sustainable water and wastewater management, access to essential services, SME financing, and employment-generating green and social projects. We are also leading an international dialogue on the Islamic social financing role in supporting SDGs with our UN colleagues. At the 8 high-level events organized already, speakers debated how Islamic finance tools can help address the challenges in our member countries and beyond. In addition, the Islamic Development Bank is collaborating with the ESCWA, CAVI, and the World Health Organization on an innovative initiative to mobilize zakat and sadaqah to purchase COVID-19 vaccines for the poorest countries. The Islamic Development Bank has also been innovative in using the awqaf, or the endowments, to secure third sector organizations' financial sustainability and thus directly impacting beneficiaries working on different sectors such as healthcare, education, and relief. Moreover, the bank supports the development and implementation of nationally determined contributions and long-term strategies. We do this in Nigeria, Lebanon, Palestine, with funding from the NDC partnership. Another key initiative was the bank's support for the Saudi presidency during the G20 2020, where leaders endorsed the circular carbon economy platform. With its 4R framework, reduce, reuse, recycle, and remove, this platform recognizes the importance of reducing emissions while addressing system efficiency and national circumstances. Dear colleagues, we learned from experience that investing in green and resilient infrastructure could create millions of green jobs and support a climate-friendly economic recovery. This approach will go a long way to help our member countries avoid bearing the costs of inaction to climate change. Such costs are estimated about 5% of global GDP. I would like to conclude by expressing my sincere appreciation to the organizers of this landmark summit, which I am sure will help inform the proceedings of the Italian G20 presidency. The Islamic Development Bank Group stands shoulder to shoulder with all MDBs, IFIs, and other public development banks to achieve the sustainable development goals for our member countries. Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing the rest of the interventions.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Our next speaker is Makhtar Diop, Managing Director of International Finance Corporation, who will also be joining us online. Welcome, you have the floor.
Thanks so much to CDP for hosting us today, and to Italy for its convening of the G20 this year. The pandemic revealed a world much more interconnected than ever before, where health and economic outcomes are intertwined, conflict is on the rise, and progress against inequality is fragile. But perhaps the most important lesson is this: when a moment arrives that requires urgency and action, we must collectively step forward to build the future we want. To tackle the climate crisis and recover from the pandemic and achieve the SDGs, we must now, more than ever, harness the private sector to achieve our development goals. The only way we will be able to build resilience and long-term sustainability is to create private sector solutions and find ways to bring more private capital in the developing world. AFC is working to address the 4 factors that all private market back. First, working closely with the World Bank and other partners, we aim to improve the policy and regulatory environment to enable private investment. Second, our upstream work, which is at the core of our new strategy, aims to create more bankable projects that will attract private capital into emerging markets, particularly in low-income markets and fragile situations, and in creating innovative solutions to address climate and gender. Third, we work to de-risk projects, to mobilize investors to work with us in the poorest country and to accelerate the adoption of new technologies which are also critical in addressing climate change. And fourth, we are developing a wide range of mobilization tools across debt and equity. For example, we are creating a targeted impact and climate-focused platform called MCPP One Planet, which will provide sustainability-driven borrowers access to newly available pools of capital. But this is not enough. IFC has set a high ambition for itself going forward. In the future, we will seek to mobilize $2 from others for every dollar we invest in our own account. We will work across all sectors, establish and emerging from infrastructure to agriculture, from health care to digital economy, and all these to scale up innovative private sector solutions for development. This includes investing not only in large corporations, but also in small and medium enterprises and supporting entrepreneurs, especially in low-income and fragile contexts. The future demands that we be bold enough to venture into the world's most difficult places, fearless enough to address climate change, fight for gender equity, and invest in the health, digital, and financial solutions that will end global poverty. The financing need to achieve the SDGs is far greater than IFC, and even all development financial institutions here present. We will need to work with all of you and with the private sector to strive to achieve the SDGs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Our next speaker is Marcos Trojo, President of the New Development Bank. There you are. Thank you, and you have the floor.
So, dear friends, I want to thank Cassa Depositi and Prestiti, IFAD, and the Financing Common Coalition for putting together this summit. It is a privilege to represent the New Development Bank founded by the BRICS countries. We are still a young, 6-year-old institution, but our portfolio now totals about $30 billion in approvals. We are financing around 80 infrastructure and sustainable development projects in 4 continents. Our lending activities have increasingly involved collaboration with other public development banks. The NDB has approved $6.7 billion, or 18% of its portfolio so far, for projects that are financed in parallel with other multilateral development banks. The NDB has also approved $4.5 billion for operations that entail on lending through international and national financial intermediaries. Within our projects, the New Development Bank is also supporting countries in tackling challenges in green financing and agricultural infrastructure. We help upgrade and build capacity so that farmers can implement sustainable new technologies. We support private sector green infrastructure by financing sustainable storage facilities, irrigation systems, and renewable energy. Our pool of experiences and projects will expand going forward. The new development bank has recently admitted Bangladesh, the United Arab Emirates, and Uruguay as its first new member countries. And as the bank continues with its membership expansion, more opportunities for joint efforts in sustainable development will unfold. My friends, over the coming years, the NDB will continue to enhance its value proposition and its role as a cooperation hub. We'll mobilize resources and ideas through innovative mechanisms, bringing together the public and the private sector. This summit is an important milestone in aligning the effort of public development banks to support common actions for climate and sustainability. The new development bank looks forward to continue working alongside the financing common partners. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your contribution. Our next speaker is Jean Leon, President of the Caribbean Development Bank. Thank you for being with us. Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Caribbean Development Bank. I want to highlight three important challenges that Caribbean countries are facing. First, the Caribbean is in the midst of a perfect storm created by the collision of the region's past and persistent structural weaknesses, the present impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the expected losses that characterize the region's vulnerability to natural hazard events. The impact of the pandemic has been profound, and all of our borrowing member countries have been set back in their development process and the pursuit of their sustainable development goals. So the question really is, how can MDBs help? We believe, in a nutshell, it is going to be through active collaboration and partnership in the pooling of resources. So first, MDBs, as we know, have a critical role to play in driving reforms to help member countries grow and achieve their sustainable development targets. To effectively do this, we believe there ought to be a holistic development framework that takes cognizance of the interplay between the debt sustainability framework of the IMF, the investment growth framework of the World Bank, and the resilience building framework of the United Nations. MDBs will more than likely need to review their scope of operations and activities to foster consistency within this wider framework, while ensuring operations are tailored to the needs and specific circumstances of the members. Second is that small island development states have peculiar vulnerabilities and characteristics that need focused attention. SIDS in particular have sought to integrate vulnerability and resilience into their development frameworks, and we at the CDB have been upgrading our framework to consider what we think are three important elements: pre-event metrics, which really is the probabilistic nature of susceptibility to shocks and natural hazards; the magnitude of the event when it occurs, which is a welfare loss measure that depends on the severity and intensity of the event, as well as initial and social and economic conditions; and third, the internal resilience capacity, or the duration it takes to return to the pre-event state. And we believe that each of these states require distinct policies, conditionalities, and modalities of financing. The third is a holistic development framework necessitates also a holistic financing framework. That includes both managing the debt issues that our countries face and the flow financing for development. We propose to distinguish, for example, rescue elements, which highlight flexibility and immediacy of meeting liquidity needs arising from emergencies. We also want to distinguish a recovery element, which would provide liquidity needs for rebalancing, but also sources to help the process of repositioning, including things like policy-based loans and grants, and a repositioning element for long-term development goals with a view to addressing not only structural weaknesses, but also transforming our economic, social, institutional, and environmental structures to create wealth-creating, sustained, and inclusive development. Let me end with two specific ideas. The first is one approach to effectively crowding out the private sector is by structuring our financing into various tranches so that the private sector, the multilateral development banks, and governments could contract financing needs at lower interest rates, but which would become effective contingent on implementing key reforms, thereby providing incentives for the implementation deficits we face. This would require clearly a collaborative effort on the pricing of reforms. Second, CDB has proposed to our heads of government to pool recent SDR allocations to better leverage additional resources for building resilient economies. We propose issuing marketable financing instruments to our BMCs into a pool that would be used as investment-grade collateral to secure either fast disbursing short-term emergency loans and to secure access potentially to financial risk management products for currency, interest rates, and commodity hedging. Equally, to attract additional long-term development finance, as well as crowd in regional and international private capital into BMCs. The focus, of course, would be on advancing complex, high-impact, but financeable development projects. And we think, again, this is an area where collaboration could provide very significant benefits. So in principle, what we are looking for essentially is that there is a very strong collaboration among development banks in general with a view to helping promote the common purpose of development of countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your message of collaboration. And now we have Akinwumi Adesina, the president of the African Development Bank, who should be connected with us. Hello. Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. We're just rushing in from the airport in London. It's good to be with you all. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, wherever we are now. I would like to thank you, Rémy Rioux, Chair of the International Development Finance Club, IDFC, and the CEO of Agence Française de Développement, for your leadership. In fact, let me say your extraordinary leadership in building this very powerful coalition of public development banks. I would like to also take this opportunity to commend the extraordinary work that has been done by my friends, Gilbert Humbo, President of the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, and of course, Giovanni Gono Tempini, President of the Consiglio di Amministrazione de Cassa Depositi de Prestiti, CPD. I think the Italians are going to have to teach me a little bit of Italian by the time I come into Rome next time. Africa is fighting bravely against the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. But the loss of lives and livelihoods that we have had, reduced foreign direct investment and trade, and an overall decline in the quality of life for our people have taken a devastating toll. Nearly 30 million people have been pushed into extreme poverty. Another 39 million people are at risk. Average GDP growth will recover course from about 2.1% in 2020 to 3.4% in 2021. Africa is showing resilience under very difficult circumstances, but the recovery trajectory is long and yet uncertain. Africa's recovery, however, must be a green and resilient recovery, a recovery that leads to quality health infrastructure and a strong indigenous pharmaceutical sector, so that never again will Africa have to outsource its healthcare to the benevolence of others or have to beg for vaccines. Africa needs a recovery that accelerates Africa's industrialization, reduces our exposure to the vagaries of global commodity markets volatilities, takes full advantage of the massive African continental free trade area, and creates much needed jobs for our youth. As I've always said, the future of Africa's youth does not lie in Europe. It does not lie in the United States. It doesn't lie in Asia. It lies in Africa that's growing robustly, able to create sufficient amount of high quality jobs for its youth. I take this opportunity to reiterate as we deal with this pandemic, and I see my dear sister, Kristalina here. It's good to see you, Kristalina. Well done. And thank you for the global leadership that you continue to provide. And particularly, I must say publicly that I was delighted with the strong support that you received from your board. As I've always told you, you are always a star in my books. I take this opportunity to reiterate my call for innovative use of the special drawing rights that you work so hard for, in particular to meet liquidity needs. I know that the discussions have been largely in terms of the great initiatives that we have at the IMF with the growth and poverty trust, and also the resilience fund that's actually been put up. But as I have also urged, I think we should be more pragmatic. We should also be innovative, think out of the box, and see how we can really optimize the full global financial architecture of the IMF complementarily with the multilateral development banks. Therefore, I think it would be good for us to look at also giving some of those SDRs to the multilateral development banks. And I say that for maybe two reasons. First is that the multilateral development banks can leverage those SDRs. Second is that, yes, global liquidity situation, if you have reserves for central banks and all of that's good. But for economies who actually do grow back, as we said, to grow back better, we do need the sectors growing. We need education, health. We need infrastructure going. We need agriculture going, and many of these things. And these are the areas in which the multilateral development banks have a tremendous amount of comparative advantage. We understand the sector policies, make sure the right kind of sector policies are done on the long term, and also leverage the SDR significantly. So I think this will come to, in my view, significantly complement the role of the IMF so that we actually have a train that is moving on two tracks to get our economies to recover and recover well. So I think this is going to be very, very important for us in Africa. And we see that a lot of this then will give resources, equities, loans, technical assistance to support the network of public development banks. And I want to thank my dear friend Rémy that we've been working very closely on this, and in particular also President Macron for his leadership on this issue. Collectively, within the Financing Common Coalition, we can address head-on critical issues of our time, including food insecurity and climate change, and spur greater actions on mitigation and adaptation. I am very proud of the strong coalition we have forged since we embarked on this journey together during the first Financing Common Summit nearly 1 year ago, Rémy. I'm proud also of the great strides that we have made in our response collectively as public development banks in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. But dear friends, our job is far from done. The challenges are still daunting. We must build back better from this pandemic. We must accelerate our efforts to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. And we must strive for a more equitable world where no one is left behind by making sure that everybody gets access to vaccines that are crucially needed. And we must collectively ensure that we go to Glasgow and deliver significant impact to safeguard the world against climate change. Thank you very much for having me, and it's good to see you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. And now we have a video message from the president of CAF, Sergio Díaz Granados. Thank you.
As president of CAF, Development Bank of Latin America, it is a privilege to be part of the Financing Common, the largest global network of public development banks that aims to ensure the alignment of financial flows with the principle of the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated how vulnerable progress on the Sustainable Development Goals had been and how stronger cooperation among all the stakeholders is needed to ensure long-term social and economic sustainability. The relevance of this coalition stems from this vision to provide a global financial architecture in which PDBs join forces to ensure financial flows respond to sustainable development needs. while aiming and integrating private sector stakeholders as part of the solution. As PDBs, we all have the responsibility to transform ambitions into reality. It is my aspiration for CAF to become the green bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, and increase our climate finance target to 40% of our portfolio by 2026, and to reach 50% by 2030. Take this an invitation to join efforts with the Financing Common initiative, uniquely placed to lead this effort and catalyze action given its global breadth, financial capacity, and ability to mobilize and leverage financing to guarantee a sustainable and green recovery.
Thank you. So this concludes our first part, which had the representatives of the multilateral and the regional development banks. So thank you to all our speakers in this first part of the Leaders Dialogue. And now we go ahead with messages from our leaders. And we're very honored to have the finance minister of Rwanda, who should be connected with us online. Hello, thank you very, very much for being with us. You have the floor.
Thank you, Moderator. COVID-19 as a global pandemic has once again reminded us about the need for global solutions to address global issues which affect everyone and every country.
Are we still connected? Sorry, can you hear us?
Financing a common initiative is therefore timely a commendable one, and it is fully aligned to the UN Sustainable Development Goals principle on not leaving anyone behind. A principle which I believe applies also to countries, to mean not leaving any country behind. Several assessments on the financing needs for the SDGs have shown huge financing gaps in trillions of US dollars per year. And COVID-19 has increased this gap, putting more at risk the achievements of the SDGs by 2030. Globally, financial resources are available in abundance, both public and private, but they don't flow to places where they are most needed. They are concentrated in high and upper middle income countries, sometimes earning very low returns. For example, in 2019, before COVID-19, FDI's inflows to Africa represented only 2.9% of total FDI inflows globally, while 90% went to high and upper middle income economies. Therefore, the question of access to affordable and long-term resources for investment in low and middle income countries merits a special attention if SDGs to which we have all committed to are to be achieved by 2030. Governments in these countries are confronted with huge spending needs for basic infrastructure, health, education, and other social services, while domestic revenues are limited and their borrowing space is narrow due partially to COVID-19, which has pushed high the levels of public debt. The local private sector in this country is generally weak, and the local financial sector is inadequate to provide the needed resources for large and long-term domestic investments. National development banks are supposed to finance long-term investment projects with affordable interest rates, but sometimes they don't have adequate resources, and they operate almost like commercial banks, by providing medium-term loans at commercial terms. Sovereign bonds issued by our countries are priced very high due to perceived risks and other investors' considerations. In view of this, of these issues, I want to make the following suggestions. One, for public financing, there is a need for developed countries to honor their ODA commitment of 0.7% of their GNI. Two, there is a need to speed up the process of the implementation of the common framework for debt treatment for countries in need. Three, rich countries should commit to reallocate a significant portion of their new SDRs in favor of countries in need of liquidity through agreed mechanisms. Four, there is a need for a stronger support to IDA 20 and the ADF 2022 replenishments to increase the capacity of the World Bank and the African Development Bank to provide concessional financing to member countries. For private financing, there is a need for more collaboration among public development banks in the provision of line of credits from those with sufficient resources to those with liquidity needs. There is a need to identify and to remove barriers to FDI's inflows to Africa and to other similar economies. Finally, there is a need to support economic reforms aiming at improving the environment for private investment, including legal and regulatory frameworks, institutional framework, private sector development, and development for local capital markets. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for your contribution. And our next speaker is the Secretary General of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, of course, Matthias Cormann.
Colleagues, I'm delighted to address this leaders' dialogue, which comes at a critical moment ahead of COP26 in just a few weeks. Recent accelerating momentum behind countries' increasing climate commitments is encouraging. But of course, turning those commitments into real action and real outcomes through a comprehensive set of well-designed, well-implemented, and globally well-coordinated climate action plans is the major challenge. We urgently need to align our recovery plans, for example, with net zero pathways, reorient financial flows, and invest in the transition. Our latest analysis of the OECD Green Recovery Database found that about 10% of recovery spending had, at best, a mixed or even a negative impact on the environment. And even before COVID-19, financing for the Sustainable Development Goals was not sufficient. In the wake of COVID-19, with budgets under pressure everywhere, the $2.5 trillion annual Sustainable Development Goals financing gap in developing countries could now increase by another $1.7 trillion US. Developing countries need access to the necessary resources to implement ambitious climate action. To close this gap, we must leverage billions from public aid and trillions from private sector finance. Public development banks are particularly well placed to do this, working between public and private finance, as well as domestic and external finance. Since 2015, the OECD has been assessing progress towards the $100 billion US a year target of climate finance provided by developed countries for developing countries. Latest OECD data shows that developing countries received only $79.6 billion US in 2019, which was up just 2% from the previous year and is still more than $20 billion short of the 2020 target. This is also only a tiny fraction of the $720 billion US in annual public spending across OECD countries, other major emerging major emerging economies between 2018 and 2020 to support the agricultural sector. The OECD is playing its part by ramping up efforts to support ambitious, effective and measurable climate action. Our new international programme for action on climate will complement the work of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and help participating countries by providing targeted policy advice. IPAC's dashboard and climate action monitor, which I will be presenting at COP26 as key OECD deliverables, provide clear, comparable indicators on progress towards key climate goals. We have also put forward a proposal to help facilitate an ambitious but internationally more coherent, globally better coordinated approach to the pricing of emissions. The aim is to help ensure that more ambitious action on climate change is pursued in a way that is both effective and fair. Effective in that it leads to a reduction in global emissions instead of shifting emissions to other parts of the world where for the same level of output emissions could actually be higher. And fair in that every country carries a fair, appropriate and verifiable share of the burden. Recognizing a diversity of policy approaches to cater for a diversity of circumstances around the world, the challenge is to ensure that a necessary lifting in ambition and effort does not lead to negative and counterproductive distortions, from competitiveness implications to carbon leakage to trade tensions. Indeed, it's about how best to preserve a global level playing field while lifting ambition and effort on climate to the level required through an appropriately comprehensive, coherent global approach. To achieve this, our proposal is to assess and report on explicit and implicit carbon pricing efforts around the world as a way to inform such a more coherent, globally coordinated way forward. We would do this through an inclusive framework type approach similar to our international tax reform process. Finally, financial markets must be part of the solution to climate change. The OECD will advance a policy framework to integrate environmental, social and governance factors which support a just net zero transition, including definitions, principles and due diligence guidance for sustainable and climate-related finance. Let us continue to work together to define solid pathways to realize the objectives of the Paris Agreement. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you. And next we will hear from Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. He's the Director General of the World Trade Organization.
Excellencies, heads of state and government, Chairman of the Finance in Common Summit, Rioux, host institutions, heads of international organizations, financial institutions, members of the Finance in Common Summit. As DG of the WTO and a former finance minister who helped create the Development Bank of Nigeria, I'm very pleased to say a few words of congratulations to you today at this second edition of the Finance in Common Summit. I welcome the ambition of the new and inclusive coalition of public development banks to support the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, help solve problems of the global commons, and assist countries, households, and businesses to recover from the pandemic whilst building back better. I often say trade is about people, but finance is also about people, and public development banks have a special duty to keep people at the center of their activities. In that regard, fostering inclusion should be an active goal of public development banks, supporting micro, medium, and small enterprises, supporting women, bringing them into the mainstream of finance is an important goal. As this pandemic ravages economies in many developing regions, exacerbating poverty and inequalities, public development banks can help bridge financing gaps and expand the fiscal space countries need to support lives and livelihoods and ensure a sustained recovery. Public development banks will also be called upon to help ensure a green recovery, whilst helping poor countries manage the transition to low carbon emission development pathways. The world around us is changing. I often say the future of trade is services, it is digital, it is green. The same can be said about the future of public finance. It must gear up to serve the services economy, the digital economy, and the green economy. Public development banks must be creative and innovative to serve a fast-changing world. I know that you public development banks are up to the task. We stand ready to partner with you at the WTO, and I wish you all the very best in this summit. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now we are honored to welcome the President of Argentina, Alberto Fernández. Thank you.
Quisiera agradecer a la presidencia italiana del G20 y muy especialmente al presidente del Consejo de Ministros, Mario Draghi, por dar continuidad a un diálogo iniciado en París y que hoy demanda respuestas urgentes por parte de liderazgos comprometidos con una reconstrucción global que no deje a nadie atrás. Entablamos este debate en momentos en que una triple crisis de pandemia, cambio climático y deuda golpea duramente a los países de renta media como la Argentina. Es necesario repensar, y lo hacemos a través de esta iniciativa, una nueva arquitectura financiera internacional que brinde una respuesta multidimensional a estos problemas tan íntimamente relacionados. El rol y el nuevo dinamismo que la realidad impone sobre los bancos de desarrollo será clave para la reconstrucción de la pospandemia. Nos encontramos frente a la oportunidad de hacer frente a los complejos desafíos que actualmente enfrentamos. El riesgo de una crisis generalizada de deuda externa en los países en desarrollo se abate sobre el planeta. Por eso, apoyamos la idea de impulsar un acuerdo multilateral inclusivo y sostenible, capaz de abordar de manera acabada las cuestiones referidas a la reestructuración de las deudas soberanas. La prórroga de la iniciativa de suspensión de servicios de deuda producida por el G20, si bien es valiosa, es una medida provisoria que no resulta suficiente. No ataca de forma definitiva la impostergable necesidad de alivio y reestructuración de deudas insostenibles. Necesitamos en particular un marco multilateral para la reestructuración de la deuda de los países de renta media, cuya falta supone un verdadero vacío dentro de la gobernanza financiera internacional. Es por eso, en víspera de la cumbre de líderes del G20, que alentamos la ampliación del nuevo marco común para el tratamiento de la deuda del G20 a países de ingresos medios con vulnerabilidades. Celebramos la ampliación y distribución de los derechos especiales de giro del Fondo Monetario Internacional, iniciativa que abre la puerta para una esperanza. Lo que un año atrás era impensable, hoy parece ser una realidad. El nuevo destino de los derechos especiales de giro debe orientarse a nutrir un gran pacto de solidaridad global que incluya a los países con alta vulnerabilidad climática, socioproductiva y financiera. Un pacto con un nuevo espíritu de solidaridad que permita extender los plazos para atender los pagos del endeudamiento y la aplicación de menores tasas bajo circunstancias de estrés social, sanitario, financiero y ecológico. Por eso celebramos toda iniciativa del G7 y sus miembros que apunte a la cesión voluntaria de los DECs hacia economías de mayor vulnerabilidad independientemente de su ingreso. Los DECs también pueden servir para apalancar las carteras de crédito de los bancos regionales de desarrollo. Pienso particularmente en el caso de América Latina, alentando los procesos de capitalización virtuosa. También Debemos impulsar sistemas de financiamiento sostenibles que promuevan mecanismos de pagos por servicios ecosistémicos. El concepto de deuda ambiental y el canje de deuda por clima sería otro paso virtuoso que tendríamos que impulsar. De cara a la próxima cumbre del G20, se torna necesario profundizar el debate sobre el nuevo impuesto mínimo global para que favorezca puntualmente a las economías emergentes y contribuya a una acción de desconcentración de la riqueza. Esta urgencia de reordenamiento de la arquitectura financiera internacional que yo les propongo supone también revisar los mecanismos negativos que propician paraísos fiscales, fuga de divisas, ámbitos de opacidad que cobijan actividades ilícitas de narcotráfico, terrorismo o criminalidad organizada. Recrear finanzas éticas y sostenibles va de la mano de un incremento de las políticas de ambición climática. No existe la crisis climática alejada de la crisis social y de la crisis financiera. Esto supone pensar en un nuevo multilateralismo ambiental que evite todo intento de discriminar a los países más pobres con barreras supuestamente ecológicas, para permitir una transición justa y sostenible que distinga responsabilidades y atienda a la cohesión social. El mundo evidencia ya una recuperación a dos velocidades, lo que implica que, una vez más, muchos quedarán atrás. Si queremos evitar las consecuencias catastróficas que dicha brecha genera en un mundo post-pandémico, debemos trabajar para construir un nuevo multilateralismo orientado al desarrollo de los países más vulnerables. El tiempo es ahora, ¿eh? El reloj de la historia está corriendo. Sin justicia financiera global no habrá justicia ambiental global, ni mucho menos justicia social para todo el planeta. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Muchísimas gracias. And we conclude our leaders session with the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres.
Excellencies, I'm pleased to greet the 2021 Finance in Common Summit. With your reach from the global to the local, public development banks are critical partners as we seek to recover better from the pandemic. The joint declaration of all public development banks at the first Finance in Common Summit last year was a strong signal of intent. Today, I call on you to turn that vision into concrete and time-bound targets and plans to align your operations and policies with the 2030 Agenda and keep the 1.5 degrees goal within reach. We must fully integrate a forward-looking and preventive lens in our work and bolster resilience to future shocks. We must reach universal social protection by 2030, ensure macroeconomic and labor policies work in tandem to support a just transition, and heavily invest in job creation and reskilling programs that expand opportunities for women and better prepare young people. Your support for the Global Accelerator for Jobs and Social Protection is essential to help ensure a more even recovery and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. You spearheaded the green bond market. Now it's the time to do more to green the balance sheet. Your financing decisions can either entrench developing countries into high-emission, fossil fuel-dependent development pathways with a high risk of locking in stranded assets, or facilitate the transition to renewable economies. This is especially true in a COVID-19 recovery context, where developing countries are battling the triple crisis of pandemic, debt, and climate. This means phasing out all fossil fuel finance, starting immediately with coal, and redirecting these investments to renewable energy to ensure universal access to electricity, and scaling up funding to support adaptation and build resilience to at least 50% of total public climate finance. To enhance transparency and ensure credibility, we also need better reporting. This requires better norms, standards, and certification mechanisms for sustainable finance and improved corporate sustainability disclosure. We urgently need a common definition of sustainable development investing. I also urge you to make climate risk disclosures mandatory in line with the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Finance Disclosures. Excellencies, we need a stronger, more integrated and networked multilateral system with public development banks as central players. I count on you to advance this integration by deepening the cooperation between multilateral and national development banks and encouraging the private sector to mobilize finance for climate action and sustainable development. Let us seize this moment of crisis to transform development finance and realize our shared vision of a net zero, resilient, inclusive, and sustainable world for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the Secretary General. Thank you. And this concludes, therefore, our Leaders Summit and our Leaders Session. And thank you to all the leaders that have joined us for this important session, which leads us on then towards, of course, we know the G20 and COP26. FiCS 21 continues, so bear with us. So there's a pause, and then we continue once again at 3:30 CET, local time. And there will be a closing session, so make sure you join us for that. Thank you very much.